My name is Steve Chillrud. I'm a thesis mentor, and I'm going to talk to you today about air pollution studies that we do. And I'm going to talk about some results from a study that we did in a high school in Harlem back in 1998. But my goals are to just give you an introduction to air pollution in New York City, some of the spatial changes that we see in air pollution, some of the changes with time, what we call temporal changes, and also why personal monitoring is really the best way to understand what you're really exposed to, what you're breathing in from air pollution around the city. The government spends a lot of time monitoring the city. You can download their data, but it's all collected, or the vast majority is collected on rooftops, where they're trying to avoid the local sources. They're just trying to get kind of the big picture idea of what the air pollution is up at the rooftop level away from any local sources. Yet we walk around every day and spend time in places where levels of certain air pollutants are much higher. So we had a study funded in the late 90s that was a direct result of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. And what that really said was that there were certain air pollutants that people knew caused health effects in the workplace, in work settings where the concentrations of those air pollutants can be extremely high. And that's how they found out that there were these toxic effects on humans. But they really didn't know anything else about, well, are there any, workers tend to be big adult males for the most part that work in factory settings. There are more and more women, but most of the studies were traditionally done back in the 1960s when most of the workers were big adult males, relatively healthy. So what about all the people who live in cities that might be young children or elderly that might be more susceptible to air pollution levels? And so they wanted to go to the cities, because after the workplace, the next place where you might have high levels would be cities, because there's lots of sources of air pollutants. So we got this funding to say basically what are the concentrations in cities, and what are the pathways that people are being, how are people being exposed? Is it when they're riding the car or riding a train? Is it when they're in their home? How are they getting exposed? So some of the ideas we're going to look at today are the air pollutants coming from local sources within the city, or are they coming from upwind air masses? Are they being blown in from the upwind? What are the spatial and temporal variations? So the changes as you move around the city versus the changes with time? And what are the impacts of other issues like traffic or air exchange? And what I mean by air exchange is in your homes, how much fresh air is coming from the outside? And that's very important not only for bringing in outdoor air pollutants, but it's important for getting rid of indoor air pollutants. There's a lot of things that we're mostly exposed to when we're at home, and we spend a lot of time at home. So our study design was, we looked at two different cities. We looked in New York and we looked in Los Angeles. In both cities, we spent time in two seasons, winter and summer. And we had some of sampling very similar to the government. We did put some fixed site monitors up on the roof of the school, and of a roof in an upland area, actually where I work, out at Lamont-Doherty. And then we had the high school kids run around with backpacks, with air monitors in the backpacks for 48 hours. They're supposed to take them everywhere they went, put them on by their bed at night. And we did roughly 40 subjects in each city. So in New York, this is where the kids lived. They lived in 4 of the 5 boroughs. Staten Island was too far to get to the school, which was a school in 135th Street. So this is Manhattan. So most of the kids lived in northern Manhattan and the Bronx, but we had a smattering in Queens and a smattering in Brooklyn. It was a magnet school that attracted kids from much farther away. And then this is where our upwind air monitor was, which is where our labs are up at Lamont-Doherty, or Observatory, where some of you come. So what did we measure? We measured, in the backpack we had a pump that pumped air through an air filter, and this air filter had a size, it took out the big particles and only allowed the small particles to collect on the filter. That's what, and the particles were less than 2.5 microns. Those are the particles that are small enough to get deep into the lungs. So we measured that particulate matter mass, and then we also measured a whole suite of elements on that. The ones with stars are the ones that are known to be toxic in occupational settings. And then we also measured a whole suite of volatile organic compounds, VOCs. These are things like solvents, like you might have heard of carbon tetrachloride or toluene or benzene. But there are also things that are in a lot of products. Products such as the air fresheners that you plug into your house to try to make your house smell nice. And there are a lot of fuel additives. So as we go around in our vehicles, we actually evaporate a lot of these from different vehicles. And then we also measured some aldehydes. We did air exchange. We took a lot of questionnaire data of what they were doing. And here's some of the data, finally. So what we have here is kind of both temporal and spatial information in one thing. We have the time that we took the data. And we have cobalt concentration in nanograms per cubic meter, so the mass in a cubic meter of air, which is about this big. And we breathe about 5 to 10 cubic meters of air a day. And then we have our upwind site at Lamont, and we have samples. These are all 48-hour samples. We have the school roof monitor, and then we have the home. We took samples inside the home, outside the home, and on the person for the same 48-hour period. So here we have what we call our home outdoors, which is put samplers outside their windows. And what you see is that upwind for cobalt was much lower than the fixed site at the school. And there was a lot of all these samples that were collected on the same day. There's quite a bit of variability, so we call that the spatial variability. So how do we interpret that? Well, we say that the interpretation is that cobalt has a lot of local sources. That's why it's much higher in the city than upwind, and that's why there's a lot of scatter. And indeed, this is from the winter. Cobalt is in fuel oil that we burn to heat all our apartment buildings in New York City. And so there's a lot of apartment buildings burning fuel oil, and so that makes sense.